I just continue to be astounded by the Amazon One Medical commercials. They're really slick in marketing, and we've raised a generation of people that click that button for Amazon. And will we do that for our healthcare? Yes, people live longer. They live longer on hospice care. Dying can be one of the most defining seasons of someone's life, and it's a beautiful model of care to help facilitate that. Federal law enforcement recently announced a $14 billion fraud takedown, largest ever healthcare fraud action in U.S. history, involving many crimes orchestrated by foreign nationals.
What caught my attention was this was the Los Angeles Times. This was Secretary Mehmet Oz, and his opener for Medicare fraud was hospice.
Reimagining hospice in an AI world. In a digital age, how should technology and humanity coexist? Do we really know what makes this special and different?
We can either sit and wait and see what Medicare or other payers tell us to do, or we can participate in crafting that next iteration of what hospice is.
One of my favorite quotes is, the best way to predict the future is to create it.
And now, here's our host, Chris Comeaux.
Hello and welcome to TCN Talks. I'm excited. This is always my favorite time of the month, and it's also summertime. This is our top news stories of the month. This is for the month of July. I've got Cordt Kassner with me. Cordt, how are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
How's your summer going, man? Did you do anything fun this summer?
You know, the best part of summer is being in Colorado right now. It's my favorite season out here, and playing pickleball and kayaking and hiking and just the activities that we can do every day, every evening. I love it. How about you?
Yeah, we actually, we always have a family beach trip, probably like a lot of families. Our beach is on the Gulf Coast, and a special week. My oldest son, we had a wedding shower for him because we have lots of family at the beach area where we went. Second son actually proposed to his girlfriend, who's now his fiance, on that same beach trip. And we played a lot of pickleball every night, actually. It was the coolest place we stayed. I'd never played pickleball on a clay court before. That was a whole different kind of experience. And they had lights, so we would stay till 10:30 at night and play pickleball. So got a lot of great steps, came out, rested, and felt like I did a lot of good activities. So, and now it feels very far in the rearview mirror as we're back at it.
Yeah, I understand. That sounds fantastic.
All right, you ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll go first this month, and I'm going to take from, you always remember I have my categories. So I'm going to take from my Chris category first, and then I'd love to hear the ones that you want to highlight. So I actually had 10 in the Chris category. There are 8 that I'll highlight. And so there's just some concerning signs, and that would be the theme of why I want to point these out. First one was in Becker's, 6 healthcare layoffs in 1 week. Those were all basically healthcare systems, but a lot of layoffs. And the reason why I'm calling them out, I do think hospitals are really wrestling with their go-forward business model. Heads and beds is not the right go-forward business model. That move from that to population health has been challenging, and yet they've not seen the reverberations, of which we're going to probably highlight several times in this podcast, of the big, beautiful bill and its impacts on Medicaid. So they're navigating tough things before even hitting that. And then you see a lot of disruptive innovations. I just continue to be astounded by the Amazon One Medical commercials. They're really slick in marketing, and we've raised a generation of people that click that button for Amazon. And will we do that for our healthcare? They're making a bet on that. And so that's another interesting disruptive innovation that kind of nips at the hospital feeder program, which is primary care to feed their healthcare systems. I think it's still 60-something% of primary care owned by healthcare systems, at least present day. So I think a lot of ominous signs for them as we go forward. And Mark used to always say, if the hospital catches a cold, do we catch the flu? I always felt the opposite. I do think it reverberates in our community, but it's not 100% certainty that means, well, it's awful for them and it's disastrous for us. I think you have to understand the systemic implications. So that's the first one I wanted to call out.
Yeah, speaking of Mark Cohen and some of his previous comments, I also remember his comments around if there are layoffs in healthcare systems. On one hand, that may be problematic for hospices. On the other hand, maybe that's an opportunity to seek staffing and to look for the silver lining in that cloud.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. Well, the next one, Cord, is you have been so great kind of highlighting these. It's unfortunate we have to, but the title of the article from the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, so AHPM, Natural Disasters, Climate Change, and the Impact on Hospice and Palliative Care Teams and Their Patients. I would have thought maybe 3 years ago, yeah, very isolated, but we think of Hawaii, of course, North Carolina, now in the Texas Hill Country. I mean, there have been just devastating situations. And, we lived it firsthand here in Western North Carolina. You could have your great plan, and man, it is nothing like a disaster like that upsets the apple cart in a major way. And then you're pivoting our wonderful friends at CCWNC in Yancey County, which is north of Buncombe County, Asheville, North Carolina. I mean, they basically lost their office. They had a river going through their office. They're just finally back in their office in the last I think probably a couple of months or so. And that wasn't on anybody's dance card as far as what they were going to be seeing. So I love the fact that AHPM is calling this out. We actually did a national webinar at the Hospice Foundation of America about what we experienced, and just the feedback related to that. I think it is in the forefront of people's minds.
It really is. The emergency preparation, disaster preparedness conversations that are going on. I actually raised this on one of the boards that I have the opportunity to sit on. What are your disaster preparedness plans? What does this look like? Can we talk about this at a board meeting? And it seems very timely, given I was asking this during the Texas flooding, and so we've queued this up for discussion on a future board meeting. And as I told the hospice CEO in an email, there's probably a better time to talk about this and think about it than in the middle of it.
Yeah,
and she was
absolutely.
like, absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, we're upping our game from what we learned. And so doing that reflective practice afterwards, and then making sure you're better prepared the next time around, but be a hell of a lot better, be prepared the first time you actually go through it. I know our friends in Florida have gotten really skilled because of the number of hurricanes they've navigated year in and year out. And just want to give you and Joy again, just major kudos. It shows your heart and passion for the people that do this work and the organizations. You have taken a lot of real estate in your hospice and palliative care today to highlight these, to give people resources. A lot of people won't know behind the scenes, Joy taking her own time, trying to connect people. That's just out of care and love for this whole field. And so I just want to give you guys props.
Thank you. Yeah, Joy's been doing an amazing job covering this and reaching out to leaders and, prospectively looking for articles and information to put in front of readers to equip them to be able to help.
All right. Next one was in hospice news. Hospice programs shudder amid financial strains. And it's interesting, it says concerns have also mounted amid federal Medicaid cuts. And then there goes on the list 4 organizations, I won't name them on air, but basically are closing their hospice houses. So the title is is definitely catchy, but it's actually hospice houses, and Medicaid has not hit yet. And so this is not closing because of that. So I just want to kind of just cut through it and say, yeah, hospice houses for a while have been losing money. It is not a financial winning proposition. Our nursing ratios are much smaller compared to, you look, what have hospitals done? They flex on, flex off because labor is your biggest cost. And so we've wrestled with that as hospices, figuring out what is that right ratio. And then the systems and processes that help staff be present in those facilities. We do a lot of assessments of hospices. We call them discoveries, just to help them kind of plot a course to the future. And if they want to work with us, we can actually help them plot that course. And quite often, we see big losses within those facilities. So then it puts a ton of strain on, can you fundraise that? Can you backstop that? So the other parts of your organization, and you run it as a diversified portfolio. So I think really this has been building for a while. Our mutual friend, Andrew Reed, Cordt, years ago, Andrew did a fascinating message that I look back and go, it was prophetic. I have no idea if it was like date-wise totally accurate, but it was the biblical story, the 7 years of plenty with the 7 years of famine. And so he's kind of saying, look, these are the years of plenty with a very rich reimbursement, which is when many of these facilities were built. And then now we've gone into a declining reimbursement era. And some of you may go, well, not compared to others, like let's say home health, totally agree with that. But yet major increases, 4 or 5% on a consistent basis has not been the case. And you have inflationary pressures. And a lot of our programs this is such heart-centered work, doing the hard work of how to make it a sustainable business and balancing the mission is so dang hard. And I think that's the core issue. And, I get the article. I mean, people are, you're having to write a lot of stuff, but from a very knowing place of how up and close and personal we get to a lot of programs, that's the real issue. And there's no silver bullet solution. And it breaks my heart that then the solution is close these down. Now, we do have fascinating conversation that'll be happening later this year. One of the CEOs we work with has a fascinating idea of a benefit add-on to what we do that I think if it could ever become, basically part of the benefit package today, which is not an easy road to hoe, it could actually help backstop this. And part of the theory behind that is I believe baby boomers want these facilities. They're like resorts of sorts in the most crucial time of your life. And so given that, wouldn't you want to preserve it and then figure out how do you rediscover this? And I think this is going to be a theme throughout today, Cordt. I grew up in this and I inherited the Mary Labiaks, the Carolyn Kassens, the Gretchens, the people that were the matriarchs and patriarchs, the Arabiaks of this whole, I want to keep saying industry. No, it's a field and a beautiful movement. And they were up against, there was no benefit. And so they just saw something that was wrong. And then we've inherited that. And I think we're at an interesting crossroads of, can we relook at that with new eyes, rediscover it, and forge a path of how that goes forward? And I think there's a lot of different opinions of the best way to do that, which to me is, those are the rich conversations. The not so rich conversations are sit down, shut up. We don't want to talk about the stuff. This is just the, this is the cell phone basically replacing the landline, which a well-known consultant uses that. That's not exactly an on. I get creative destruction, disruptive innovation. I could teach it for an hour long. This is an interesting inception point that most industries face, and it's like rediscovery phase. They teach this in business school. And so it doesn't necessarily mean throw the baby out the bathwater, but it also doesn't mean you can't relook at things or have these tough conversations. So I'm not sure if you have any comments on that one.
I think there's I've had some questions from readers around, how many inpatient units do we have, and are they the same, and how long have they been, in existence, and are they closing down? This article mentions 4 that closed. Well, we've also seen articles, Vitas, some other hospices that are newly opening inpatient units, nonprofits as well. We had a couple of those in the last 2 months. Celebrating the opening of inpatient units. And so I think there's opportunity here to, as you say, let's take a look at the data. Let's understand what are the trends with these inpatient units, because they are really, really important for patient care. And what is happening? I think there's a lot of questions, not so many answers. And this is a great opportunity, as you say, to reflect on this and how can we fine tune the role and opportunities that inpatient units provide.
You just gave me a good word. Like, this is probably the question and reflection and wrestling stage, but very quickly we're going to get to, and out of that, what will you do? How do you plot the course to the future? Because there is a lot of change culminating at the same time. So I'm not giving everyone a freebie that, then I could just sit back and kind of be contemplating. You got to building the airplane while you're flying at the same time, while you're hypothesizing what plane needs to be built. But it does feel like this is a really smart time to step back and look at these macro trends and go, what path will we forge? And what does that mean locally for our community, our organization? But then also, where do I need to be working with my state association, my national association, to be laying the regulatory tracks to be incongruent, incongruence, I should say, with those strategies. So I think it's a great time to be alive. If you're, what is that Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times. Yeah, that to like probably the third power right now.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, so Los Angeles Times, Medicare fraud has gone global. It'll take a nationwide effort to stop it. Again, kudos to you and Joy, because you've done a great job. There was a lot of articles this month pointing this out. I'll just read a little bit from it. Federal law enforcement recently announced a $14 billion fraud takedown, largest ever healthcare fraud action in U.S. history, involving many crimes orchestrated by foreign nationals. And then it goes on to talk about some challenges within Los Angeles. I was actually sharing this with my wife the other night, and she said, "What?" I said, "There are national syndicates, we'll just leave it at that have been involved in hospice fraud." If you'd have told me that when I came into this movement in 1995, I've been like, that's crazy. No possible way. What kind of time warp have you gone into? But yet here we are.
Sheila Clark sent me this article offline one evening, and so I set it up and ran it the next day as a headline in the newsletter. Sheila, of course, is the president and CEO of the California Hospice and Palliative Care Association, and so this is her backyard, right? All of this activity in California, she's very hands-on and involved in it. What caught my attention was this was the Los Angeles Times. This was Secretary Mehmet Oz, and his opener for Medicare fraud was hospice. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what world are we living in that national government leaders, when they think about waste, fraud, and abuse, the first thing they think about is hospice. Like,
that makes
as you said, 20, 30 years ago, that never happened.
Yeah, that makes me uncomfortable because then it's the few bad actors that are painting the whole broader movement field in a negative light, which means you can't bury your head in the sand. We got to play offense at some level. Kudos to you guys. And we're going to get to Ira's article. But I think he really stopped me in the podcast. If our listeners have not listened to the podcast we just dropped a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Ira Byock, first thing he said, wait, we got to go back. First thing is, collegiality is out of the window when it comes to fraud. We have got to call it out, basically name it what it is. And I thought that's hard for us wonderful caring hospice people, but yet the zero tolerance, I think he's really onto something with that.
Absolutely.
All right. So the next one I loved, because we do live in interesting times politically, right? The joke around Thanksgiving is leave politics at the door so that way you can still have a good family. Well, this is an opinion piece in the Washington Post. My health and my politics walk into a doctor's office. And there was a beautiful story about a Christian palliative care physician and Jewish daughter of Holocaust survivors who is basically in a lifelong vocation of social justice and two completely worldviews. And I would say they together had a beautiful palliative care experience and then had a beautiful op-ed about it. And the reason why I want to highlight that one is, by golly, that is the road less traveled these days, but we need more of that. And so, the beauty of understanding each other's perspectives. I love this Stephen Covey quote, none of us see the world as it is. In other words, my viewpoint, I don't have the corner in the market. All of us see the world as we are, not as it is. So if I have a great friend like yourself that looks at the world in a different way, I would want your perspective because your perspective plus my perspective gets closer to what the reality is. But yet we live at a time where go to your corner, go to your echo chamber. Let me give you Skinner's rat, ring the bell, just over and over again. In other words, just keep getting fed the same thing. So then people get deeper and deeper entrenched in kind of those places as opposed to good friends that used to be on different sides of political beliefs, et cetera, with the collision of ideas. I think that's what makes Elon Musk fairly brilliant is he eliminates the silos that traditionally are in manufacturing and forces them to come together, and they create synergy in ways that we haven't seen. I just got my first Tesla. It's an amazing experience. And so I think there's some cool through lines in that. And the reason why I want to bring it back full circle, that is always what made hospice special, is the IDG team, the magic of the team that we'll call it. And so that wisdom, I think, is an interesting wisdom that's portable in a lot of parts of our society. And we can't lose it at this time as we're in that reflection stage of where does this thing go? In fact, how are we kind of the light a little bit of bringing that to other places? Just like this palliative care physician was a bit of a light, but also both of them together from a deep appreciation for one another.
When this article came out, Joy and I had a conversation about it before we ran it in the newsletter. And one of her comments was, we would be negligent not to run this story. Like, this is popping everywhere. It was all over our media feeds. I read through it. She read through it. We talked about it. And really this article was from the patient's perspective, having a clinician who had a different political belief. And we ran an article back in November last year of a hospice clinician who was driving up to a patient's house who had a different political belief. And that wrestling internally, like, can I do this? And in both articles, really, I think the bottom line was that call back to common ground, that humanity, that we can hold different perspectives and care for each other and help each other and accept help from each other. And it really was a cool article. I thought both of them were very interesting. I just saw Ira had posted on his LinkedIn page a link to this article and kind of promoting conversation around it. I think for many of the same reasons.
Now, the key word jumps out. I mean, everything you just said, Cordt, all of it was great, but that word common ground, I think that is the road less traveled these days. Even in organizations, leadership is my passion, and that's so foundational. If we don't go back to a common ground, you can't get people pulling in the same direction. So how do we get everybody pulling in the same direction? Let's start with what's our common ground. Can we get agreement on that? Because if we get agreement on that, then you've got a foundation to work through challenges and differences. But if all we do is focus on the challenges and the differences, you just keep chasing your tail, and it gets worse and worse and more animus, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly is not how you lead an organization, a department, a group, much less an entire country, or even this experience of humanity. So again, kudos to you guys for calling that one out. I knew you would like this next one, being the fellow tech friend that you are. A CIO's tech wish list, brilliant framing actually by Beckers. What IT leaders would buy with a blank check? That is just brilliant framing. And so if you've not read this article, you need to go back. I don't think it actually hit Cordt's top ones of this month. And so here are some of the key things. Ambient listening for clinical documentation. The cool thing is Cordt and I are in a future council together around technology, and we're seeing some of these same themes emerge. An AI healthcare platform that predicts, prevents, and personalizes care before patients even realize they need it, a la Amazon kind of technology. Adaptive, responsible AI infrastructure that spans the full healthcare enterprise, clinical, operational, and financial. And then, of course, you can't have a great party without someone trying to spoil it. AI-powered cybersecurity platforms. I've actually spent time talking to a few chief technology officers in healthcare. And what always concerns me when I walk away is how much cybersecurity concerns them. It is kind of the challenge of our time as we have these amazing advances. This is the shadow side of it. And a lot of us as leaders, I don't understand cybersecurity. I just know someone's got to get our back related to that. And I think that's true of a lot of healthcare leaders.
We're so busy on a day-to-day basis with patient care, with surviving, with keeping the doors open, those everyday challenges, that when we step back and try to think about this bigger picture and what's coming next, I always think that's fascinating to do. But I always kind of return back to encouraging pilot studies and like how can my sphere of influence, the circle of people that I'm around, how can we participate in that? How can we participate in the pilot testing? And it might be AI focused. It might be participating in a technical expert panel for Medicare hospice regs. Like, don't just wait for stuff to come down the road, but how do we participate in the conversation to shape it and participate in the pilot projects to develop it?
That's so good, Cordt. Gosh, that's so good. That came out of a different future council than the one that you're in. And it reminded me of two articles I'd read years ago. Number one, Kaiser, at one point in time had an experiment lab where they would test a hypothesis. And they had a way and a very scientific method to try new things. Like they literally had physician offices, like a studio set up. And what they would try is basically just new ideas. So to me, the most beautiful movie that shows that, if you ever watched The Founder about Ray Kroc and about McDonald's, it was with Michael Keaton. It's a great movie. And so the flow of the very first McDonald's, they went to like a park and they had a concrete pad and they drew it out and they kept erasing it, trying to get the optimal flow. That's a beautiful visual to me of what you're poking on. We don't do that well in healthcare. It's like, well, I got an idea. Okay, well, let's just roll that out organization wide. And years ago, Jim Collins came up with a great adage: first fire a bullet before you fire a cannonball. Try the experiment. Use some scientific rigor around it. You got to measure what's your hypothesis, what are you actually testing, and then rapid cycle it. And then years ago, I'd read Subway actually had a method to do this. Like they would try new stuff, and they had like a lab kind of set up with customer focus groups, and it would then cascade new ideas throughout the whole organization. I'd never read someone being that deliberate about it, because the reality is most of the time we're doing that stuff on the fly. And I'm not so sure we are as successful. We're sometimes creative to a fault. And then those ideas get more diffuse as they get to our organizations. And okay, that was a bad idea. Well, no, maybe it was actually just we threw too many variables at the situation at once. So yeah, you're really getting me started on something. AI is going to bring a whole new game, because you theoretically could do that via technology. You literally could war game it via technology, depending on how good you build your scenarios, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I love the analogy that you mentioned with Collins, and before you fire a cannonball, fire a bullet. And where my mind goes is, but fired a bullet. Right. We've had several today's encouragement quotes in the last couple of weeks that are along the line of, in order to do something great, do something. Like just start. Do something, get involved and make a difference.
Well said. All right, just a couple more, and then I'd love to hear the ones that you wanted to point out. Rural hospitals, I-service expansions to weather federal cuts. Of course, the challenges of the big, beautiful bill on Medicaid have not washed upon the shores of our rural hospitals yet. They've already been dealing with a lot of challenges. What I loved about this modern healthcare one, it's kind of painting a picture of where they could expand services. So, and also where they can make some potential cuts. So renegotiating vendor contracts, beefing up coding billing, freezing new hires, standardizing daily tasks. All that was on the cut side. Of course, talking about philanthropic dollars as well. But they're also talking about some interesting ideas of where they could grow via surgery, infusions, other complementary services, creating more of a continuum within these rural hospitals. And so I love that. We're actually working on a TLS consulting group project with a fascinating group that's working on some interesting models to take into rural hospital America. And again, Mark Cohen, our mutual friend, he had pointed out something I never knew, that the whole Burton Act it was a public-private partnership, and a lot of these hospitals got built because of these government grants. And you think of 50 years of economic positive consequences. Some of these rural hospitals are the biggest employer in small town America, and they're on the brink. And so some type of rejuvenation, obviously we're getting a theme here today, Cordt, right? Trying to contemplate where are you and what's that path going forward to the future. Maybe that's always been true, but it feels like we're at a very interesting hinge point right now in a lot of parts of our economy, especially healthcare economy. And I just want to point that out because I think rural hospitals, it's going to take that for them to be able to survive. And then the last one, and I want to give you the last word on this one, wisdom and leadership. Do we have time to be wise? And so there's just talking about the pace that we live. And I feel it, right? AI is only accelerating what was already a breakneck pace. I use this a lot in the training that I teach, Cordt, that Stephen Covey would use the analogy of the whitewater rapids of life in 1990. 1990. Here we are, what is that? Almost 40 years later. And so 35-ish going into 40 years later. And if that was class 4 or 5, I don't actually think in the world there are class 6 or 7 rapids, but I think that analogy would be somewhat applicable. So do we have time for wisdom? And I'm getting this sense for my personal self as a leader, the pathway is countercultural, like stepping out of the crazy. Maybe it is the time. No, it is the time for wisdom. Not maybe. It is the time for wisdom. But how the hell do I take time to be wise when I have 150 emails and 50 Teams messages and every back-to-back meeting, I don't have time to go to the bathroom, and you want me to be wise? But yet maybe that countercultural move is exactly what is needed during this time. And I feel like in some respects, my podcast with Daniel Pink, I feel like he was kind of saying that the road to the future is countercultural. It's different. It's not more left brain stuff. It's more right brain superpowers. And I think wisdom is actually kind of much more head and heart, kind of whole self, stepping out of the crazy, getting quiet, etc. So what are your thoughts on that one?
I thought the title of this article was brilliant because my title was using the double negative. We don't have time to be unwise. We have to pause and think and reflect. And in the green room before the show, we were talking about the backgrounds of being very passionate in pursuing a cause. And while I love the passionate pursuit of a cause, we also have to be wise about it. And sometimes we have to temper that. And that is only me speaking from lived experience.
That's very well said. All right. So those are the ones I wanted to highlight. How about you?
I had a few, and I know every podcast when we do this, you have a framework of X number of categories and how do the articles fit into the categories that you've designed, which is always a challenge to me because, I think about, okay, well, these are Teleos categories. I think about Enneagrams, the personality test thing, right? The numbers 1 through 9, I think. Well, what articles would appeal to a 1? What articles would appeal to a 5? It's a different grouping. Well,
love that.
So last night I was listening to your podcast with Dr. Ira Byock, and I listened to the whole thing. I thought it was fantastic. One of the best podcasts I've listened to probably in a couple of years.
Wow.
Because I resonate with the message that you're both trying to drive forward. And so when I was preparing for today, I thought, well, what were Ira's categories in his white paper, A Strategic Path Forward for Hospice and Palliative Care? And I think we're going to talk about that again a little bit more in the masterclass at the end of the show today. But how do our articles fit into his categories in this sense? So to walk through it quickly, he begins with zero tolerance for waste, fraud, and abuse. So I went looking, how many stories did we run? We have primary tags, secondary tags. We categorize and, look at, reports and run all this stuff behind the scenes. We ran 24 stories this month about waste, fraud, and abuse that we had categorized that way. Some of these included really egregious examples of what was happening in hospice. You mentioned one earlier, the one with Dr. Oz in the LA Times. As Ira stated, you mentioned as well, collegiality ends at criminality. We've got to identify this and put a stop to it. So I thought, well, we're on pace here. Jim Parker at Hospice News wrote a story that caught my eye titled Healthcare Attorneys, Hospice Investigations Coming from All Sides. That story received over 1,000 clicks, which was cool. We also ran a story featuring several OIG investigations that received like 20 clicks each, which was surprisingly low for how important I thought those stories were. Ira then outlines 4 calls to action. Clinical and programmatic standards is the first. In addition to calling out the bad, he said in the podcast, it's important to differentiate between good and excellent. And so I'm going to mention Carolina Caring a lot today, but one of the reasons is they had a very highly read story, high clicks on it, talking about a deficiency-free CHAP survey article. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes because it's one of the top read stories. I'll just point out, with the background working with CHAP, that less than 5% of CHAP surveys are deficiency-free. This is very unique, and to be part of a hospice that has a deficiency-free survey, I liked that Carolina Caring put that out there and made a big deal awesome. Because it is a big deal.
So proud of them.
Yeah, demonstrating that excellence.
Kudos to, I love where you're going with this, Cordt. Like this framework, I think you should stick with this framework for a bit, thinking about my framework and yours and how complementary they are, but just the importance of what Ira laid out. I think you're onto something. And I want to give you props. I mean, you guys have done a great job this past month highlighting the waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think I'm actually going to tattoo that somewhere in my office. Collegiality ends at criminality. That is such a brain tattoo way of actually framing that. And you guys have done a beautiful job this month pointing those out.
Thank you.
as well as the positive, like a Carolina Caring. What a juxtaposition of the crappy versus the really good. And I'm stuck at night. We always, at our family thing at night, is one happy and one crappy. And so we do that. So you've got a lot of great examples of the bad, but what a beautiful example of the good with the Carolina Caring team.
Yeah, they did a remarkable job. Ira's second call to action, making meaningful data readily available. And this was actually the first article that came to mind. It was actually, I skimmed through the 300 articles that we ran this month. And actually the one that came to mind that best illustrated this was a recent New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst article that was titled Successful Strategies for Operationalizing Goals of Care Documentation. The lead author is Dr. Matthew Gonzalez, who succeeded Ira leading Providence's Institute for Human Caring. And this article talks about how they improved from 7% of ICU patients having documented goals of care conversations to 85% having documented goals of care conversations between 2016 and 2024. In fact, I just saw a Jerry Powell podcast dropped this morning talking about this article. So very cool. I thought in terms of using meaningful data to improve patient care and make a difference.
I was just going to put a highlight on that, Cordt, because we've been challenging all the hospices we work with is, do you really know what makes hospice and palliative care special and different? Like, do you really know? And so what are the things in our organizations or in the model that produce, like we'll call it magic. Unfortunately, magic makes it feel like then unobtainable. So if you actually get down to the things that make it really special, I would say actually care planning, goals of care, care planning is one of those things. And the more we push for efficiency, which is going to be more the gravitational pull, if you lose those things that produce the magic, in fact, it's the opposite. You got to go deeper on those things. Like, how do you empower people to do that at even higher levels when the gravitational pull is cut, more with less, which actually we have an article about that a little bit later.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool. And I'll just give a teaser for readers around the meaningful data piece. I just finished running all of the 2024 calendar year claims. And the first thing that I look at when I sift through all of that is hospice utilization rates. And so I'm getting ready to write a paragraph or maybe a page, very short. We're going to run in the newsletter about the 2024 national hospice utilization rate came in at 50.6%. This is the highest percentage of Medicare deaths on hospice we've ever had. Very, very cool. I think that's really exciting. I think that's coming out of COVID. I think there's a number of reasons for that. But look for more details on that to come, because I haven't written that up yet, but I'm getting ready to.
One thing to keep in mind when you write it, Cordt, because we've actually seen this in one of the states where we work, it's no doubt our people are doing a better job. I think we're getting better at how we reach people that need care. But I also think one thing that's driving that statistic is the death pull forward that happened during COVID. So the percentage of people eligible right now, like we would be serving people today that died in COVID. And so that population is a little bit less. So I think it's creating a little bit of an artificial. I do think we're getting more sophisticated. I know the ones we're working with. So I think it's a both and. It's just not just that one thing. The other thing I always kind of think about is Joan Tino. And I think she said a third. You would probably know better than me, that there's about a third that will never choose hospice. So does that mean basically, that 70% is like generally what's totally possible? It's really good to know that. And the interesting thing, and I don't know if you know that, but as we go forward, is that going to become less, or is that going to become maybe a little bit more? Because the baby boomers just look at the world differently. I think that statistic has been a little bit based on the rearview mirror of the greatest generation, as now we're going into the baby boomers.
Yeah, I think Joan has said that. Stephen Connor comes to mind for me, the former research lead at NHPCO, who's been president of the World Palliative Care Congress for probably a decade now. Stephen had always said that as well, with the understanding that about 25 to 30% of people die in their sleep, die in a car accident, where hospice isn't even an option on the table. There's sudden deaths that hospice would not be able to reach anyway. Uh, so the suggestion there is 70% would be the highest attainable goal in a country like the United States. We've already seen states, like in 2024, Utah came in at 66%. Like they're almost that's the highest in the country. Utah's the highest in the country, and they're almost at that 70% mark. I think nationally, we'd probably top out more around 60%. So we're working in that direction, and the reason is not every state is going to is comprised like Utah. So we're going to have states that are at 40%. So it's going to be interesting to see. The third point that Ira drives home is driving competition based on quality. And we ran several stories this month that I would highlight around emphasizing quality. We ran a story about Impact Health integrating end-of-life care into PACE programs, several stories around children's grief programs and expanding healthcare options for children living with serious illness. Carolina Caring, not only the CHAP survey, but a specialized program supporting patients with dementia. And Big Bend Hospice, I thought was really interesting, launched a new mobile medical unit. I thought, how many hospices have something like that? I thought it was a really creative idea. His last, I don't know if you have any thoughts around those.
Actually, you're right, because it is actually the road less traveled, but I do know of a few other nonprofits like them that have basically created like mobile palliative care units to take into rural areas, because it's really hard, all that windshield time of taking palliative care in the community to people. So then trying to create a general space where then they could come to them, because then sometimes a palliative care clinical office space is hard to pull off, and that space can kind of move and be in different communities along the way. So I've seen it in a few places. I think the people that have done it, they've learned a whole bunch. Like a lot of those people in those areas are very frail. So you would think, okay, brilliant, it's coming to them, but then they can't even get in the mobile RV unit. And so then handicapped accessible. So there's been a lot of devils in the details that they've learned by they deployed it. But like you, I love the innovative thinking of, hey, we got to do something like that, and know the folks at Big Bend. They're great people. They do have a lot of that rural area outside of Tallahassee, so I can see why they would do that.
I'd love to learn more about that. Ira's final point was embracing and promoting our authentic brand. So I thought, well, what articles have we run around this? And Chris, I think your category for this is more around the mission moments and the unique things that hospice and palliative care providers do that maybe we don't always think we're unique in doing it. We ran several articles this month highlighting compassion and caring and expertise of hospice and palliative care providers. Some of those included Hope Hospice. This is the Hope Hospice in Texas. They hosted a community vigil that drew hundreds of people after the deadly Texas floods. Again, more articles around children's grief camps, which happened during the summertime, so there's a bit of coverage there. A research study on serious illness conversations in the emergency department, and another one exploring palliative care knowledge, attitudes, and self-competence of nurses in hospitals. And lastly, I'll just mention, because it caught my eye, a story that ABC News ran in Cincinnati, where the reporter did a ride-along with Hospice of Southwest Ohio's CEO, Veronica Sterling. And the title of the story was something like, "She knows a lot about death." I mean, it was clever. It was cute. And I thought, how cool would that be to have our hospice CEOs doing ride-alongs with media but we talk about inviting a legislator to your hospice. What about inviting a reporter? I just opportunities. Man, that's what I have.
High five. That is brilliant, framing them on those categories. I would encourage you to stick with that for a bit. And I think it's going to be, if we could try to do that maybe for at least another quarter, and then we'll compare our notes across each other. So I'd love to now, so let me go to my categories now, Cordt, if that's okay. So obviously I dropped down in the beginning to my last category was kind of Chris's category. So mission moments is first. I highlighted 6 articles. I'll try to keep it to just one for most of these. So mission, as you call them, mission moments, or as I love the way Ira framed it, our authentic brand. So out of the 6, I love this one. It was actually an aging care. Okay, please help me calm my anxiety. My mother has drastically improved in the last couple of days since going on hospice. It was such a great article because, there's nothing that frustrates us the most, but instead of being frustrated, think about how do we talk about what we do in such a way that we could get past this? Well, I thought mom was going to die immediately when she came on hospice. She got better. I'm like blown away by that. Yes, people live longer. They live longer on hospice care. How can we do a better job embracing the authentic brand so that becomes more of people understand that? I give Tina Gentry all the credit, our chief operating officer. She used to have this brilliant way in community presentations, and she would say, about hospice, and our listeners, I'm pointing to my head. She would point to her head and say, about hospice. Then you experience hospice, and she would cross her heart and say, now you know hospice. And it's a brilliant framing of trying to illustrate that all of these fallacies, these myths that we have, the natural human instinct to survive at all costs, which is beautiful. I mean, it's why we're here, millennia later, doing what we're doing upon the face of the earth. But yet dying can be one of the most defining seasons of someone's life. And it's a beautiful model of care to help facilitate that. But quite often, 50% of people in America are getting 2 weeks of that when it is an actual benefit for them for 6 months. And so I know when I go on vacation, it sucks that it's only a week. And so the end of your life, you only get to do that one time around. And what it does for the family as well as the patient, I think that's what Dr. Byock is poking on with the authentic brand. And so I think this article is in that realm. Mm-hmm. All right, my next category was reimbursement challenges, which interesting month for that. There were 4 articles, only one I want to point out. This was actually from the Alliance. Medicaid provisions threaten home and community-based services for millions of vulnerable Americans. And so I think there's a lot of consternation of the big, beautiful bill that was just passed. I think I saw an article like, already this place closed. Well, not actually because of the implications of the bill yet, because it's not actually happened yet. It's going to be in the future. And so that feels a little bit of hyperbole, but you would be foolhardy not to be thinking about how is this going to impact us. Now, I do think for us in end-of-life care, hospice, palliative care, we stand better than most of what it's going to mean for us. Now, there's going to be ripple effects, but there are also going to be first-order magnitudes for hospitals and other people. Home health is looking at a pretty major cut, not necessarily directly related to the big, beautiful bill, but also because their payer mix is, they have traditionally more Medicaid than we do within hospice. So that wasn't a very clicked-on article, so just want to call that one out.
Yeah, and I've received several questions around, were the stories discussing the impact of the big, beautiful bill or the home health proposed rule that just came out? Were the articles discussing the impact on hospice from these things? And so I went through both of those. I did searches for hospice and palliative care and serious illness and goals of care. I mean, kind of common terms that might get at hospice. And it's not directly mentioned in either of these, the big, beautiful bill or the proposed home health rule. So to your point, I don't think there are any direct impacts on hospice to alleviate some anxiety around this, but there could be indirect. If home health gets hit, if nursing homes get hit, how would that impact hospice? As you say, ripple effects that we need to pay attention to. But the only articles I've seen, I think we ran one of them, is that there's really not that much of a direct impact.
Agree. I think that's actually the way to land the plane. I do predict that you and I were going to see more and more as we get into the year, as people start, like probably the most poignant, this wasn't an article, it's actually a very influential person in the country who you would know, and said, hey, my prediction is the first place you're going to see it is hospital-based palliative care programs that are funded or co-funded by the hospital with the local hospice. I'm like, oh, that is dead on. And so if that's majorly strategic to your local strategy, then that would be something that you probably want to be aware of. So my next category, Cordt, was competition to be aware of. Only had one article this month. It was fascinating to me. Humana agrees to purchase bankrupt Florida provider The Village's Health for $50 million. And so that's interesting. Now, it's actually more of like their kind of insurance product. But you may go, what? Humana and The Villages? And so I just wanted to point it out for this reason. I read recently, one of our team members pointed out that Toyota has basically built a city of the future, because way Toyota sees technology and how we utilize vehicles today is going to change significantly. So they may be more renting us space and time in a transportation vehicle than selling us a vehicle today. And you may go, that's fascinating. What's the application for us? And so we have gotten more calls from senior living communities thinking about how to partner with hospice and palliative care in the last 2 years than a long time. And so I think that's an early indication that there's going to be interesting innovations in our space as well. And so how can we, I love the quote that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So how do we create that future as opposed to just stepping back? And I think you're going to see a lot of interesting partnerships like this. Some that are going to be like, we're going to go, that was brilliant. And many of which are going to fail. We've already seen that with a lot of like Best Buy's foray into healthcare, et cetera. So you can have a bit of a mixed bag. I don't think the takeaway is don't try. I think it's maybe thoughtfully try, or some of the things you're alluding to is how to set up smart experiments and fire that bullet before you fire the cannonball. Next category. Oh, sorry, Cordt.
I was just going to say real quick, it was probably 15 years ago now. I served as a dissertation committee member for my first PhD student that I was working with. So I was one of her committee members. And her goal when she finished her doctorate, her PsyD, doctorate in psychology, was to move into a community like the Villages to be the paid gerontological psychologist.
Wow.
Okay, so 15 years ago, and I'm thinking that's really an interesting idea. And what's the parallel for hospice? And I don't know that we've really unpacked that, but
right.
How interesting to think about all of the 55 plus communities that are out there now, and how do hospices partner in those settings?
Yeah, well said. Well, next category is workforce. I know this is top of the mind for many people. Just one article I was going to point out this month from Becker's. 51 healthcare leaders' takes on doing more with less. So that kind of gets to what I was saying earlier. There's no doubt this is going to be part of our, yes, guys, we're going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. How do you do more with less, but how do you not throw the baby out with the bathwater or throw things overboard of the ship that you need for the journey? There's going to be some wisdom, back to that other article, so you see how these themes are coming together. And so I think just cutting, which, the article was just unpacking just how challenging this is as we go forward into the future. It's a buzzword, do more with less. Our hospital colleagues are doing it in spades, and I don't know how well they're doing it. I could only judge it based upon how many of us are experiencing healthcare. And so can we take a cautionary tale from that? I did see in manufacturing, Chainsaw Al Dunlap was a very popular figure for a bit, and he would just go in with a chainsaw in these manufacturing facilities and wrote a book and was kind of popular. I'd say that's the extreme example. And I think what we learned in that circumstance was a chainsaw, non-discerning, gutting a company and trying to flip it. Are you really creating value? And you think in healthcare, the sacred trust we have of people's care. So yes, you're going to have to cut costs, but how do you do it thoughtfully? That is just really difficult. All right. The next one was patient, family, customer demographics and trends. I had 12 articles this month in this one, Cordt. Just want to point out 4 of them just in title. The grave outlook for hospice family caregivers. We know as we go forward to the baby boomers, we're going to have more and more of a challenge of admitting people that don't have readily available caregiver or a family support system around them. What are we going to do with that? And the answer can't be, well, we just don't admit them, because someone's going to serve those folks. So that's one I wanted to call out. KFF did a great study, a look at nursing facility characteristics between 2015 and 2024. And interesting study confirmed that Medicaid is the primary payer for 63% of these residents, followed by 24% private other payers, and only 13% from Medicare. That's a great study. I don't think it was clicked on quite a bit, but kudos to you guys for pointing it out.
Yeah, and just a brief comment on this article. Judy Lund Person has joined our group as a guest editor, which means, hey, Judy, if you see something that you like and think is interesting and want to highlight it for our readers and make a comment, like, Please. Ira Byock has also joined us as a guest editor. Mark Cohen is doing that. We have some other folks that we're talking with, and just really appreciate people taking an interest in the newsletter and sharing their expertise with readers. So thank you, Judy, for highlighting this for us and offering some comments on it.
Yeah, I love that you guys added that. I actually pay special attention to all of their comments. Well, next one was how PACE is jockeying for position amid Medicaid cuts. So PACE is certainly, I think, something that maybe STAR is continuing to wane, and that people, and it is a Medicaid diversion program as far as getting people out of nursing facilities. So it's going to be interesting to watch PACE programs. The next one is changing funeral preferences. NFDA's first of its kind generational report now available. Cordt, I've bumped into very smart hospice leaders that are asking the question again, should we think about being in the funeral home business complementary to our business? And so it's an interesting thought as we go forward, because the preferences around funeral homes is actually changing real time. Baby boomers and then the multiple generations below them, quite often are them making the decisions, are just much different than the greatest generation. A lot of those traditions are being thrown off, if you will. So there's a lot of disruption occurring in that funeral home industry right now.
A lot to learn there.
Yep. Next category was regulatory and political. So they had 10 articles in this category this month. We'll really encourage our listeners. We always include a link to all of those. I'm not going to take your time this month, but it was a very busy month, regulatory and political. All you have to do is turn on your news at night. And so there were 10 that were, you at least want to look at the titles, and they'll give you a gestalt of what happened. Of course, the big, beautiful bill, but there also was some stuff around trying to empower nurse practitioners. We know we have the HOPE coming, and so there was a great blog from our TCN team. Carter Brewer introduced a bill to strengthen palliative care and hospice workforce. And then Kathy Hochul in New York has got on her desk. And so, Cordt, you were 100% correct. I had misread it last month. And so it's still sitting on her desk about a medical aid in dying bill. So there was a lot going on in the month of July on the regulatory political side. And if you're a C-suite leader, this is exactly why we do this show. And we include the links afterwards. Don't miss.
Thank you to our TCN Talk sponsor, Dragonfly Health. Dragonfly Health is also the title sponsor for Leadership Immersion courses. Dragonfly Health is a leading care-at-home data, technology, and service platform. With a 20-year history, Dragonfly Health uses advanced technology and robust analytics to manage durable medical equipment and pharmaceutical services as part of a single efficient solution for caregivers, patients, and their families. The company serves millions of patients annually across all 50 states. Thank you, Dragonfly Health, for all the great work that you do.
Last couple categories, technology. There were 5 this month. One I'll point out, reimagining hospice in an AI world. In a digital age, how should technology and humanity coexist? And Cordt, I was smiling because I felt like that future council you and I are part of. One of the maybe key phrases that jumped out at me is keeping humanity at the center as you think about how to apply AI. It's almost like they were listening in some of our discussions you and I have been a part of, and that was in home care. So that was a great article. All right, and then just last category, so the speed of change, resiliency. There were 2 articles, only one I want to point out. Leaders shouldn't try to do it all. Many important tasks can be done by other people. Focus on what you can do a lot better than anyone else. That was a Harvard Business Review article. It's a great article. I struggle with this every day. There's so much coming at us. And so the paradox is, well, then I just need to do it all. No, as we go forward, how do you do more of what you're great at? How do you keep increasing your skill set so then the actual toolbox of tools of what you can do well expands? But then also, how are you making sure you're not owning problems you shouldn't own? This is something I'm constantly turning the mirror on myself. And then the last category is the human factor. And so there were 3, only one I want to point out. This is almost like a cringe. And so hospice nurse who amputated patient's foot without permission for use in a sickening taxidermy display escapes jail sentence. And this was a Wisconsin nurse. Just horrible article, but this is the type of stuff that when we think about our authentic brand, that this is the type of stuff, so unfortunately, the perverse kind of sometimes sells, like the John Oliver series that Dr. Byock called out, appropriately so. But I'm just like reading this going, really? I can't believe this actually happened.
That was my thought. You can't make this stuff up. And we had a few readers that emailed and texted Joy and myself offline about this article. We posted it in the ethics section. And as a former co-chair of the University of Colorado Hospital's ethics committee, I'd say these kinds of outlandish cases are not isolated. I've seen more and different and worse than this in a hospital ethics committee. And really, my take home for this is it illustrates one more reason why I encourage hospices to have ethics committees and to partner with their local hospital and other ethics committees to have that insight, that reflection, and an opportunity, a group of people to bounce ideas by. I would say every other year, I see in the national organization email threads, how many hospices have ethics committees? How do they work? What kind of cases do you talk about? And it's like we reinvent this conversation every other year. There hasn't been an ongoing, like, who's the resource for ethical deliberation?
That's a great point.
I don't think there is one right now.
That's actually a great point, Cordt. Actually, we had one at Four Seasons, and interestingly, we tried to establish one at the TCN level early on, and I've kind of lost sight. So I think that actually really does poke on something great, and you would be an incredible resource for people because I know how passionate you are in this area. Well, a lot of stuff this month. So July was a very interesting month. I have a feeling that our prediction at the beginning of the year, a predictably unpredictable year, is going to only get more interesting as we go forward in future months. Do you want to talk about the data side? It's always interesting to look at it from that perspective.
Sure. I'll be brief with this. We analyzed the click-through rates for all of the stories in Hospice and Palliative Care Today's newsletters. In July, we published 302 articles that received a total of 107,000 clicks or reads. Notably, 21 of these stories surpassed 1,000 clicks. That's one of our thresholds that we look at. All of these stats are lower than previous months, and I'll just share with you and listeners. This is in part because of summer trends and not as much relevant material being out there, but it's also we're piloting new things. We have decreased the daily number of stories from 15 down to 12. We're trying to focus on more relevant stories and respect readers' time and how long it takes to skim through the newsletter each day. But we are continuing to monitor all of these trends. In terms of top read stories, the number one story, I said we look at those with over 1,000 clicks. The top read story this month had 4,400 clicks. And that was our awards and recognitions, which we run monthly. And this month we featured several winners several award winners from the Florida Hospice and Palliative Care Association annual conference. Carolina Carings achieving their deficiency-free survey from CHAP, as well as a certification for age-friendly care. And a friend and colleague of mine, Kim Mooney, longstanding Colorado end-of-life care leader, was recognized by the End-of-Life Options organization, which she founded and got rolling forward. So I'm very excited that the number one most read story was really our tip of the hat, our thank you to the outstanding work that our colleagues are doing around the country. The second most read story was the Alliance's Caring Info program launched a new planning for in-home care section. And this is an outgrowth for folks who remember NHPCO's Caring Connections and their caringinfo.org website. The third most read story was the Hope Summer School. And this was a little bit of a surprise, nearly 3,900 clicks. Listeners in our Western states might remember Annette Lee. She was an educator with Cahaba Mac back in the early 2000s. That's when I got to know her. And she has since left the Mac world and founded Provider Insights is her company. And she has developed a series of online webinars around a Hope, she's titling it a Hope Summer School. Thrilled that our readers are wanting to learn more about the Hope tool and quality that's out there. I will just pause there from a time perspective because has been a tremendous amount going on this month.
Thank you, Cordt. Well, again, it's always fascinating to look at the data. And then, of course, my perspective, your perspective. is there's just so much good stuff to talk about, actually, even despite maybe a little bit of a slower overall as people take summer vacation, but a lot that they shouldn't miss. Well, let me just end with this masterclass. We would be remiss not to talk about in the masterclass again, Dr. Bayak's article. I have it here. So, a strategic path forward for hospice and palliative care, a white paper on the potential future of the field. Just 2 weeks ago, we dropped that actual podcast by the same name with Dr. Bayak. I would strongly encourage our listeners, go back and listen to that podcast. And the framework in there, and Cordt just used it for his, the standards, the data, quality-based competition, authentic branding. And to be honest with you, when Cordt brought it up in our top news stories of June, and he said something I hadn't considered, like we need to take this into the boardroom. We need to take it into our leadership meeting. Our associations need to take this up. I strongly encourage you, Dr. Bayak put his heart and soul into this. You may go, who cares? This guy he's one of the patriarchs of this whole movement. I was kind of embarrassed because I had read Dying Well, Love Before Things Matter Most, two of my favorite books. I asked him his magnum opus, and he mentioned The Best Care Possible. So I immediately purchased it. I've been going back to this book, and he said this is his magnum opus. He put his heart into this book about this is the beautiful mission moments for hospice and palliative care. And we live at a time, this theme has gone through our show today. Do we really know what makes this special and different? Like, do you really know that as a leader? And how do you double down on that while you're actually cutting costs, which may sound paradoxical, but yet they may be exactly congruent? And then how do you recast this thing that's hospice and palliative care under your own brand whenever you have a new customer washing upon the shores of your organization? I think he gives us a framework to at least call the whole movement, the field. Some people will call it an industry. Maybe that's the cautionary tale that doesn't devolve into an industry because we don't do these things. He's giving a framework and like, do you agree with the framework? And, you may not agree with him tactically, but that wasn't his point. He put so much thought into this. There's so much heart and years of experience, someone who's been by the bedside, who's got great credentials, and has probably thought more about these care models, not just hospice and palliative care. You got to pay attention. And so don't dismiss this. Pay attention. I'm practicing what we preach. We're bringing this into several meetings on the TCN side. Cordt and I were brainstorming before we started of other ways maybe to get this out there. I don't think Dr. Bayak is saying, I have figured it all out. I think he's saying, like great movements, can we agree on this as a common ground? And can we together then forge what that looks like together? Because if we just ignore some of the macro trends, the John Oliver articles, the things that are just like the horrible, the criminality, collegiality, ends of criminality type stuff, there's enough warning signs on the dashboard. And what I said, Cordt, in my podcast with him that haunts me is a Eric Hofer quote that things start off as a beautiful movement and then they go to a business and then they deteriorate into a racket. There's some racket lights on the dashboard that are flashing. And you may go, well, that's just such a, look how it's painting all of us. And we already have a hard enough problem helping people understand our authentic brand. So the masterclass is listen to that podcast, go and read his white paper, but don't let it stop there. My call to action to you is what I'm trying to walk myself. What do I do with this? I have to do something. If I'm going to ignore it, well, then that's at least a deliberate choice. I think that's hard to do because of everything we've talked about today and all these other things. Or there's something you're going to do with it. And I think that's what's going to create a fascinating future is what do you choose to do with it? And I'm thinking of a prior podcast, Cordt, where great consultant out there where we were debating, he and I, a little bit of the disruptive innovations of hospice, like, PACE is a substitute for hospice. Is it just as good? I don't think it is. But the person basically said is, what data do you have to prove that, hospice is this great quality thing? Now, I know that gets your dander up because you spend a lot of your life trying to help us beef up the quality. We're on the precipice of hope being initiated. That is going to be a potential mechanism, vehicle, Trojan horse to really up our game potentially of what does quality mean within. So I think there's a lot converging here. And that was my aha on that podcast. I'm always kind of a sense of the timing of things. So it feels like this is a really interesting timing of things converging. And what are you going to do with it? And that's my call to action. I'll give you the last word on it.
We agree completely on this. He's outlined a fantastic methodology. We have the most skin in the game for this. We can either sit and wait and see what Medicare or other payers tell us to do, or we can participate in crafting that next iteration of what hospice is. And we're of course nudging listeners to get involved and to participate and to not just take what's given to us, but to actually shape it, craft it, and participate.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. One of my favorite quotes is the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think maybe the byline on this one is at multiple levels, your local organization level, your community level, the region you serve, and then your state and national level. And if all those rivers are converging and then helping to create a way amongst this framework in a positive light, like moving us to a new good place as a movement, as a field, then wouldn't that have been like the result of our life's work? Just like we look back in the late 70s and 80s when this thing came to fruition. It's not like they had a box and they walked in and said, hey, Congress, can you pass this for us? Thumbs up. Good. Thank you. We're going to go now create a multi-billion-dollar industry that you're going to love how this thing turns out. It was not like that whatsoever. It was very messy. And this feels like it's our time for a similar type messiness. And the beauty of a framework is it gives you a framework to further that as we go forward. Cordt, always appreciate our time. I know this one went a little bit longer. And to our listeners, always want to leave you with a quote. Cordt actually alluded to these. They were actually on the 23rd and 22nd of July. First one is an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. And this one with Tony Cade Bambara, the most effective way to do it is to do it. Thanks for listening to TCN Talks.